Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is JT here, and if you are hearing this, you've once again tuned in to the Consequence of Habit podcast. Hey, my next guest is a gentleman that goes by the name of Seth Blais. And by all accounts, Seth looks like he's living about an amazing life. He sells cars, and he doesn't just sell cars. He sells some of the most expensive cars in the world. I'm talking McLarens and Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And he's living in, I don't know if it's a high rise. I mean, I go on this guy's social media, and it appears he's in some high rise in Boston, socializing with just other people that seem to be living a really, really good life. What makes Seth's story interesting is it really wasn't all that long ago. His life looked much, much different. Seth was deep into an addiction of heroin. When you hear this guy's story and you see what his life looks like now, it's going to make you question. Well, it made me question. What does an addict look like? What does an addict sound like? What is an addict capable of? How far can they come from near death? From having this thing like addiction holding on to you so strong, and yet you're still able, through recovery, to push through and God, just achieve some really amazing things. So Seth is very open, and it's weird. I mean, I see this guy, like I said, I don't know him personally. I read an article. He had written an article for the Daily Stoic, and if you heard any of my other podcasts, you know that Stoicism is something I've been kind of researching, so since I read that article, I've been trying to get this guy on the show. And he was super gracious with his time, but I'm going to be honest with you. It really made me think. You know, like I said, there's this polished version of what I see now. And it takes a big person living a lifestyle, being surrounded by the people they're surrounded by now, and yet still be open to your demons, to the things you've had to go through and things you've had to work through to get yourself back to where you are now. So without further ado, I bring you Seth Blais. All right, thanks for joining us here at the Consequence of Habit podcast. Today we are honored to have on Seth Blais. Seth, I appreciate you coming on with us. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming, so I appreciate it. Yeah, that's right. We've been kind of going back and forth on this for a bit, but I'll say the reason that you kind of came up on my radar was when I first started my process of trying to become a better version of myself and kind of analyze some of my habits and what their consequences were. I started getting into Stoicism, and we mentioned before the podcast started, but you'd written an article then. How did that exactly work? How did Ryan Holiday reach out to you, or how did that even come to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess we'll back it up to when I first discovered Stoicism, which was very close to when I actually wrote that guest post for Daily Stoic. And at the time I was living in a sober house, or a halfway house, which is kind of a place where you have a dozen men living together in a house. I was on a twin sized bed, sharing a bedroom with another guy that was like 6 feet away. You're all sharing the kitchen and the bathroom and everything. Have curfew, drug testing, all that stuff. And that was part of my journey, was being in that place. And while I was there, I didn't have a lot of belongings. Of course, I brought a bag with some clothing and a few books. And actually, one of the books that I brought was The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, which was one of the books that kind of helped me discover Stoicism. And it really spoke to me at that time. For me, I had spent, a decade of my life using drugs, ultimately kind of using cocaine and heroin every day, and just tore my life apart, went through all the things you might, job loss, bankruptcy, divorce, all the things that stereotypically might come along with a habit like that. So for me, what spoke to me was the idea of looking at the worst things that have happened in your life and then turning those into the best things that have happened in your life. And that's the whole theory behind the obstacle is the way, right? Is
Right.
for me, this crippling drug addiction that I had and ending up where I was on a twin mattress in a sober house and looking at that and say, okay, how can I lean into this and how can I make this into something good? And that's when my journey started of, well, let me share it. Let me write about it. Let me help somebody else out. And then in turn, doing that, really helped me open up some doors in different ways to potentially maybe turn it into a career or just get to where I am now in a few short years, which is completely night and day from where I was when I first discovered that. So, once I started writing, I can't even remember exactly how it happened. I don't know if Ryan had posted something, looking for guest posts or what it was, but I think I just shot him an email. And I had already been writing at the time. And I said, hey, I'd love to share, my experience. I also happen to have the obstacle is the way tattooed on my body. So that probably doesn't hurt. Oh, yeah. I think I can show you here. But,
yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just kind of worked out, and he, between him and his wife, I think they both kind of collaborated on the site, and they liked what I had to offer. And we went back and forth with a few drafts and ended up, posting a guest post, which I was really happy about and stoked to be a part of.
I just want to back up a little bit because when I see what you post now, you mentioned how bad your life was, and from where it is now, it doesn't seem like it seems like you got a pretty good gig going. Like your stuff that you post, and that's what I really, one of the reasons I really wanted to pick your brain is I love the fact that somebody can come from, like a dark bottom place, and then these positive changes that they can make, and over time how successful somebody can become. Because you grow up thinking, hey, somebody's an alcoholic, somebody's a drug addict. I don't know. Maybe in my head, that was almost like a lifelong sentence. How did you get to the place you were? And then what was the final flip? Like what was the switch that said, good God, man, I got to change something?
Mm-hmm. So for me, it took me a long time to realize certain things. And I think what it kind of comes down to is, for 10 years of my life, I was using drugs. I was, every single day it was hard drugs. It was, mostly I was an IV user. So I was injecting myself with heroin, cocaine, doing all these things on a daily basis, and had all the negative consequences that came along with doing those things. But what I came to realize is it really isn't about the drugs, right? So I always say, well, drugs aren't really the problem. Drugs were my solution. Drugs were my solution for those 10 years. So you really needed to, or for me, I really needed to explore, okay, why was it that I was using drugs in the first place? Because not everybody that takes a drink or a drug becomes hopelessly addicted and spirals out of control. Why is that? If it was solely because of the drug, then everybody that tried it would be going down that same path, right? So I had to figure out, okay, why am I, and that's part of the reason why it can be a life sentence, right? Because if you are in that and if you focus too much on just removing the drugs, like quitting the drugs is the easy part. The hard part is staying off the drugs, because you have to figure out why you were doing it in the first place. You have to change yourself so that you no longer need drugs. That's what it's about, right? So for me, I want to reach a goal. I don't wake up every single day and say, I need to avoid using drugs today. What I do is, I want to wake up every day and just be indifferent towards drugs. I can take it or leave it. I don't care. It's not something that I have to fight against, because I've done the internal work to change myself enough that there's no reason I don't have that desire to reach for them. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is not just removing drugs, but looking in yourself and saying, what do I need to change in me? I'm the problem. The drug's not the problem. I'm the problem. What can I change?
Yeah, that kind of speaks to, and I'm gonna butcher this, but I know there was a study done on like people coming back from Vietnam, and they looked at the percentage of people that had tried smoking heroin, and then the percentage of people who, and they actually did it quite a bit while they were there, but when they came out of a war zone, were able to just kind of kick the habit, and where other people, it's not, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
So was it through like a 12-step program that you started peeling back those layers, or was it stoicism? Was it a mix of all of these things? Like, what was it?
I think it was a mix. definitely went through the 12-step program. That was a big part of the recovery community that I was in. I was going to meetings all the time and had a sponsor and did that whole thing. I don't go to meetings as much anymore. But the big thing for me I think that Stoicism helped with was it gave me maybe a little bit of a push to step out into the public and start sharing my story. And even very early on when I was in, trying to embody the whole, the obstacle is the way mindset, through a series of events, I got thrust kind of into this public spotlight locally where I was 2 months sober and I was already on the news talking about a local recovery coaching program that a police station was launching, and just through a weird series of events, and then started writing. And what's funny is the first thing I ever wrote was published in a newspaper. First thing I ever wrote. Crazy. And so it's just a very weird series of events that forced me to have this accountability and forced me to be so public that it tore away the shame of before that. I used to walk into a room, and even if nobody in the room knew me or knew about my past, I would have that insecurity of people are looking at me because they know of the bad things that I've done. And I carried that with me thinking, even going back to childhood, I had that inner feeling and that inner dialogue of if people knew the real me, they wouldn't like me. And I think having that feeling as a child was a big part of why I chose drugs as an adult, but that feeling carried into adulthood. And no longer having that, I've kind of used those worst, darkest secrets that typically people would have and use them to my advantage and really found power in them. And it's been really beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fact that, I think alcohol, drugs, all those things, they make, obviously you feel shame from it. And then that whole thing of either hiding something and not feeling authentic and worrying about people seeing through that, right? Like you can meet a bunch of strangers. And I want to back up a little bit. Your 9-to-5 job is you're selling cars. You're I don't want to mess up your title here, but you're
sales manager at a car dealership.
And the car dealership you're working at is all high end. These are all expensive cars. So you're around people. What I'm getting to is you're around people in the financial world or in the as far as successful people, you're around a lot of them. So was that still going on? Were you doing that at the same time where you were kind of in your addiction?
Yeah, it's been interesting because my career through all of this, I haven't always worked in high-end automotive, but I've worked in selling biotech and working for different companies. I've always been in the sales and marketing type of role. And through most of the 10, 11 years that I was actively using drugs every day, I kept a job. It wasn't until the very end that things completely unraveled. But you always had this, I always had this kind of imposter syndrome of like, and again, it started when I can remember thinking this when I was 5, 6 years old of if people knew the real me, they wouldn't like me. And then as I'm, working in a corporate job, going in the bathroom to shoot heroin before a meeting, you kind of have the same type of feeling as well, right. Of course, for very obvious reasons. But I think even without the drugs removed from those situations, I would still have that. And that's a big part of, a lot of the factors that kind of went into this whole journey for me is, your childhood shapes so much of your behaviors and the choices that you make in your life. And it's really what over just the past 4 years, what I've been doing is trying to unlearn those things that I learned as a kid, those little behaviors that I picked up on, and trying to kind of rewrite my brain and change the direction of my life drastically.
Yeah, this one's probably going to go out in a week or so it's going to be fresh to people because I had said at the last podcast, I was talking to somebody else who had kind of completely changed her life, and it was the same kind of thing of looking at that childhood stuff, and it's, there's an author, and I forget his name, but he mentioned writing a letter to that childhood version that either changed or adapted or just to get by because they had that same kind of feeling, that feeling of not being enough, or if I wasn't putting on this act right now, they wouldn't like the real thing. That doesn't serve you as an adult. And the sad thing is a lot of people that persona you can put on, it's like it's a defense mechanism. But when nobody's around, that's when that stuff gets real tough. Like, you know, it's like being an actor, but no one ever says cut.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing, you know, about it too is, you know, I'm certainly not an expert in, you know, things that we're talking about. I'm not an expert in, you know, self-care and, you know, looking inside myself. I'm not an expert in stoicism. I'm not an expert in recovery. And I try to make that very clear. The reason why I can talk about this stuff, you know, intelligently, and the reason why I can provide things that might help other people is because I've been so bad at these things. That's really it. You know, I've made every mistake, and that's why I talk about them, because I know them intimately. It's not, I'm not a guru of recovery or of stoicism or anything that we're talking about. I'm very bad at it. And I think that's why my story is valuable.
Yeah. I always feel, you know, I mentioned stoicism in a lot of the podcasts, but I mean, I'm certainly by far not an expert in any of these things or an addiction. And same as you, and all you can do is talk about your own experiences. And with that said, to be 2 months into recovery and already doing an interview, and you mentioned that was another way of holding yourself accountable. I imagine at the same time that had to add a lot of extra just pressure to the entire process, because that's really new in recovery.
Yeah. And it's funny because and this is something that we can talk about, is living in a sober house. And they have this thing of, I was told to get a get well job. I was told to go wash dishes at a local restaurant, you know, keep a low profile. The things that I was doing wasn't encouraged by any means. And for me, I moved into the sober house, and I went and got a job as a sales manager at a car dealership, working, you know, long hours, you know, and making it home before curfew. And then it was just a really strange. So let me tell you the story about how this whole TV thing happened. Sure. So I am at Panera, just getting out of the house, using Wi-Fi, because when you live in a sober house, or at least where I was, you had to be out of the house between certain hours. You couldn't just sleep all day. You had to wake up at 8, make your bed. You had to get out of the house and look for a job or do something. So looking for a job, I went to Panera using Wi-Fi, on my laptop, doing whatever I was doing. And 2 tables down, there's a man and a woman having a conversation. And they were talking about addiction, specifically talking about heroin addiction in the community, and talking about some different programs. And I was picking up pieces of their conversation. And I don't know why. I think it was because, you know, at the time I was going to 2 or 3 meetings every day, and we talk a lot about, at that time, I think about saying yes to certain opportunities, and, you know, not being afraid to approach people and talking to people, especially when, you know, finding a sponsor at a meeting and things like that. For whatever reason, the mindset that I was in, I said, before I leave, I'm going to stop at their table and introduce myself. I don't know why. I don't know how that's going to bring value to them or me, but I'm just going to say hi. And I did that. So I stop at the table and I say, you know, hey, I overheard some of your conversation. My name is Seth, and I'm a person in recovery from heroin addiction. I just wanted to introduce myself. And so it turns out one of them was a local politician. The other one was a woman who ran, basically worked for a coalition of 5 different police stations. And she did a lot of things, but during that time was working on launching a recovery coaching program where the police force was going to be more focused on trying to help people get resources and into recovery, versus they had recognized they can't just arrest their way out of the problem. Right. So recovery coaches are people who essentially act as a liaison. They're not providing any sort of service directly, but they're going to help people help make those connections. Right. They'll give you a ride to a meeting if you want to go, or they'll help you. You know, they won't fill out an application for you, but they'll maybe, you know, help you with it for a job application or for treatment or anything that's going to help you. Right. Just somebody that's kind of there as a guide. And so through meeting her and exchanging information, I ended up, when they had the press conference on the news announcing the program, I actually wrote, you know, like a 10-minute speech and stood up on the podium with all the news channels there and told my story of heroin addiction for the first time ever on TV, when there was, you know, maybe only a handful of people in my life knew, you know, outside of my mother and 3 friends. And I just kind of blew the lid off everything. Ripped the Band-Aid off. And from that moment, you know, I was kind of forced into being this, you know, unwillingly kind of this poster boy for recovery type of thing in a way. Turned out to be really good though. And maybe exactly what I needed to actually make it stick this time.
Yeah. I noticed you don't, you know, some people that it becomes all encompassing, and then, you know, their recovery is something that's it's very public. It's what they post about all the time. You not so much like that. From what I've seen, you know, you have your whole other social life, your work life, and to the point where I even had to make sure I was talking to the right Seth, because I looked at the article, and then I'm looking, you know, either at your Instagram or something. I'm like, I mean, this is going to be really awkward if we get on and I find out this guy just sells cars, has never had a drink or heroin or anything in his life.
Yeah.
So talk about that. Is it part of your daily conversation? Is it just something you know, now that it's been out, you've certainly had your name out there. Like, how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, it's something I have that conversation with myself also. How do I balance those two things? And, you know, it's not necessarily something I talk about every day, right? I think I guess now when it comes to social media, I just try to be more authentic. And I think that's why even I post maybe now less stuff that's just about mental health and recovery, because that's not 100% of what I do. Like, I do have a job. I drive cool cars. I, you know, have a social life. I live in a cool city. And I'm just me. You know, I want to be an entrepreneur and continue to start businesses. And I'm very involved in other things like that, just as much as I'm involved in writing and speaking and doing certain things as well. And that's just all part of me. I think when it comes to talking about addiction and things like that, I also have different audiences, right? So it's, you know, I do have, when I write my column titled Facing My Addiction in the Portland Press Herald, people know what they're getting. You know, if they follow that, they know what it's going to be about. I also have a different group of people that follow me solely because of cars, and we network and we buy and sell cars, you know, exotic cars wholesale, and we do different things. So, I'm just trying to be authentic and be me. And, you know, I like to sell exotic cars and I like to talk about mental health. I like both things. So that's just kind of what it is.
Yeah. And I think there is something dangerous too about all of your identity being wrapped up in one thing or the other. And it's got to be exhausting. Even coming on here in the podcast, I try and switch it up, because if we just talked about nothing but addiction, I mean, it's fucking depressing at some point, right? I mean, It's great to hear nothing but awesome stories, but usually there's a long trail of tears and some, you know, not good things in the wake of that. So
yeah, I've never wanted to really I've struggled trying to not get myself put in that box either, because it's funny. I'll write something can be very specific about, you know, my experience with heroin addiction and kind of a lesson that I learned through, you know, something with addiction. However, if you take that same lesson and you apply it to your own life, if you have no experience with substance use, there's still value in it. And going back to like what we mentioned earlier, it's not really about the drug itself. Like, I don't feel like there's a lot of value in me writing, as far as to the masses, a lot of value in me writing specifically about drugs and about the science of it and about addiction. And that stuff is interesting and it is valuable. But for me, as more of, you know, we can all learn from, why did I use drugs? Because maybe you're not using drugs or alcohol. Maybe you're dealing with your childhood trauma or things that you dealt with in just different ways. But that doesn't mean we can't apply the same strategies. And it's, and look at ourselves and figure out, it's all about personal growth for me. And that's what I like. It doesn't matter to me, if it's just about addiction, just about stoicism, whatever it is, I always want to be learning. And that's,
yeah. And I find that, well, I'll say I agree. For me, it was alcohol, but quitting alcohol really, it wasn't that hard, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't find that in itself that hard. Working through all the other reasons on why you do it, that's where the real work is done. That's what for me. And I don't, I've seen other people where it's much more of a physical thing. But but that just wasn't my case. But I also find other things in my life will creep in. You know, they say like addiction is almost like water. It's going to find the path of least resistance. And I can definitely see it creeping in, or at least a familiar feeling, knowing that I'm just trying to escape out of my own head, or just do something because I'm not super copacetic and
but that's the thing that you have that you're doing. That's an advantage, is that you're able to recognize those things and you're willing to look at those things. You know, the problem is when people get stuck in this, you know, if you just remove drugs, like, and you know, from, if you've been to 12-step meetings, people are referred to as dry drunks, right? They've removed the alcohol, but they still have the bad thinking and doing the same things. It's not enough, right? If you want to actually change, you have to be willing to look at what you're doing, be willing to recognize, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong, and be able to say, okay, why am I doing this thing? What's the reason that I'm doing this? And most people I have plenty of friends now that refuse to go to therapy. I don't know, there's like a weird stigma to it, or they think that they're not going to like what they find. And to your point, I was going to say there's probably one of my top 3 favorite quotes. That's like an addiction quote, is the best part about getting sober is that you're finally able to feel your feelings. And the worst part about getting sober is that you're finally able to feel your feelings. And that really encompasses it.
Yeah. What is your normal, like, what's your day? You said your balance, obviously you've got your job, and I imagine your personal growth, which is also part of your recovery, is something you check in on a daily basis. What's your normal day look like now? I mean, and where does your world of recovery fit into that?
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's fluid. It changes, you know. For the past month, I've been trying to do a little bit of a reset on some of my habits, and I've been getting up every day at 6 a.m. and working out all month, which has felt great. I've been like pre-ordering all my food, so I physically feel really great. Trying to get, you know, we're all in this weird space right now with COVID of like trying to figure out, you know, everybody's kind of, I feel like, going in one or two directions. You're either really on a good schedule and you've made the most of it, or you've just kind of gone off the rails and you're just living in chaos and just trying to survive. Right. And I think that's okay. I've tried to be easier on myself. I'm the type of person that if I don't have structure and I don't have a calendar and I don't feel like I'm being productive, I get really stressed out. I get really hard on myself. And so I've tried to be better about, it's okay. Like, you're making progress, you're getting through it. You know, not every day has to be the structured, perfect day of, you know, I made my bed at 4:30 a.m. and worked out for 2 hours, and, you know, then read 4 books and, you know, went down to the shelter to volunteer for 6 hours. It doesn't always have to be that way. It's, for me, I'm trying to focus on the little things and getting those right. And really, you know, as weird as this sounds, I'm 32. I found recovery at 28. I feel like I was really born at 28. I feel like I'm just a kid right now trying to figure out how to live as an adult, because I never really ever did that. And so now I'm trying to learn how to properly live and how to clean my own place and how to make my bed and make my food. And so it's great.
It's funny you said, because even for myself, I've on the surface had always had things together, and my life had never truly fallen apart. But I agree in the fact that you can numb yourself, or you can. I mean, I just consider it like arrested development. At some point, when you're numbing yourself on a regular basis, you just stop developing, and you're stuck in whenever that started. And I'm 45 and I'm still trying to figure it all out. So, you know, before this started, we had mentioned that you've got some other projects that you're looking to partake in. Are those things some of the things you can share now or no?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to save and invest as much money as possible. You know, as much money as I make, I try to stash as much as I can. And, you know, for me, I've worked in automotive for a while. So now I'm working on, in the next few years, I want to either buy a dealership, or I have some other business ideas that I'm actually currently working on right now, more on the wholesale side of automotive that could make sense. Wouldn't be owning a retail dealership, but it's buying and selling cars wholesale, helping other dealerships. I guess I can kind of leave it at that.
That's a really fast rise, because this was you were in a sober house, and that was 2018.
Yeah, that was about 4 years ago this fall. I think so. Almost exactly 4 years now, in that range. Yeah,
4 years.
Next month will be 4 years.
So you've gone from, and I'm just going off the article, but kind of living in your mom's basement, deep in addiction, heroin, cocaine, to you spent the past 30 days eating clean. And I mean, like as far as a complete opposite of where you were 4 years ago, where you go from putting heroin in your system to worrying about if you're having too many carbs. Like that's a pretty legit turnaround.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine at that time that much progress could have been made?
At that time, no. And that's, I think what's changed for me over the past 4 years, obviously removing substances from my life that was really not helping the situation, but I've mentally spend less time limiting myself. I had a lot of self-limiting beliefs, whether that's I would notoriously self-sabotage. Things would get good in my life. Every time things got good in my life, I had a promotion at work or something good happened, my drug use would increase tenfold, or I would relapse, or something would happen. Always, without fail. And so for me, even all through my 20s, if I would walk down the street and if I had mutual friends, for example, with a happy couple that were married and had a good life, I would look at that and I would think that I could never achieve that. In my mind, I couldn't have that. If I saw somebody with a nice car, it wasn't something that I could achieve. Somebody lived where I live now with the view that I have, no way that I could ever achieve that. And that was something subconsciously that was just set in me as a kid, that I held myself back. I would quite literally, and this took me years of therapy to figure out, but I would quite literally at times when I would smile and I would get happy, I would physically take my own smile away because I internally didn't think that I was allowed to do that. As weird as that sounds. And that just permeated through my entire life. So for now, the quick rise is just more of, you're right. I had nothing. I had pawned literally everything 4 years ago. I mean, literally everything. I had, backpack full of clothes. Thankfully, my mom let me crash in the spare room. And people don't realize how bad it was. Like I've overdosed and almost died many times. I've been, shocked back to life. My own mother used to come into her spare room and lay beside me to make sure that I was still breathing at night, for the time that I was staying with her. It was bad. I was 50 pounds lighter than I am now. I was in rough shape. And so for now to be 4 years removed, I live in a gorgeous high rise. I have awesome friends. I have a life that I could never imagine. It's truly a blessing, not just because of recovery, but because of my own willingness to go to therapy, look inside myself and realize, all of this that's happened is because of the conditioning as a child. It's because of the self-sabotage. Here's why I've done these things, remove some of those limitations. And then truly, like, life is limitless. You can accomplish anything you want. I think we just tend to hold ourselves back based on our own conditioning.
Hey, why do you think you were born that way? Do you think you were or predisposed? Like, what do you think makes the difference? You talk about being a child and having a certain thought process. Where do you think that came from?
Well, I think first off, all trauma is relative. Also, I think I went through some pretty bad things. I think as a kid, I experienced a lot of violence, sexual abuse, different things. But I think it's relative. So you don't have to go through things like that to have similar feelings that I have, because trauma is relative to your experience, right?
Right.
But what I've noticed is, I think probably 100% of people, or maybe we'll say 99% of people that have a substance use disorder, that are addicted to drugs or alcohol, have childhood trauma. But not 100% of people who have childhood trauma have a substance use disorder. And that's just because how we are able to handle them. So for me, growing up and experiencing the things that I did, I also was taught through watching my father and my older brother who were addicted to drugs and alcohol. Two things. My father and my older brother never showed pain, emotional or physical. They were tough guys. They never cried. They never said their feelings were hurt. They were never upset. The only emotion I saw was anger. They didn't talk about their feelings. And if they did have a bad day, their go-to that I learned as a kid was to drink or to drug or fight. So for me as a kid, that's what I learned. And that's what I did through my adulthood until I figured out that that's not normal and healthy. So even if your experience, like I said, it's all relative. So even if you didn't experience those things, we are so shaped as kids that the smallest decisions that our parents make put us on these trajectories in life. And these, you could have a mostly healthy childhood, but there could be, something, kids have a lot of trauma from maybe a divorce. Maybe they weren't sexually abused or they didn't see violence in the household, but relative to their existence, they still have trauma from this event that happened. And so it's just important to be able to explore that and realize why you do what you do. And if you're doing things bad, make the changes to understand it and do things a little bit different, change your reactions.
Yeah. I compare it to like a blueprint. Like kids are just given a blueprint on how you're supposed to, do your normal life. And is your dad and your brother, are they sober now? And just tell me if I'm treading in water I shouldn't be. But the second part of that question, do you have a relationship with those two currently?
Yeah, so those are both great questions, and nothing's off limits. My father died about 5 years ago now. So he actually drank himself to death. He had cirrhosis of the liver, died a pretty kind of terrible death with his own. He was a very heavy alcoholic for a lot of years, and then also got into prescription opiates and eventually killed him. My brother and I we're not on speaking terms. I don't think he's sober. Him and I used to use drugs together. And there's just a lot of weird family dynamic and drama when it comes to people, especially when people dying and, you go to divvy up assets and, all these different things that happen when people die, it tends to get messy. And unfortunately for my family, that was the case. So we haven't talked in recent years, unfortunately.
We mentioned stoicism. Not a ton of people even understand what it is. I know it's really grown in popularity, mostly because of Ryan Holiday and his podcast and some of the books that come out. What are some of the core things that it's taught you? And I'm going to guess that goes not just for addiction, but just life in general. What have been some of your biggest takeaways from it? And even if I feel free to give a little explanation of what it is too, if you feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, for me, as I mentioned before, the obstacle is the way has been probably the first and biggest lesson that Stoicism has taught me, of coming to the realization that the worst things that have happened in my life, for me, have turned into some of the best things, just because of how you choose to look at them. Right. I think Stoicism for me, the other big lessons that I've learned is understanding what I can control and what I can't. And with addiction, I think a lot of my life was spent trying to control everything. I was trying to control my own emotions. I was trying to control everything around me. And you can't. What you can control in life is it's a very, very small list. And it really boils down to the only thing that you do control is your reaction to everything else. There's this really great story that I use all the time that I read. It's an old Stoic story. I don't remember exactly where it comes from, but it talks about how you have two dogs and they're tied to a cart, right? Like a merchant cart. One dog, as the cart gets pushed, down the street, he fights, he's on a leash and he fights against the cart. He doesn't want to go where the cart goes. And he's constantly pulling against the leash. The other dog just goes along with the cart and he enjoys the 10 or 20 feet of leash that he has, and he wanders, where he's able. And, I related to that because I feel like for the first half of my life, I was thrashing against the chain. I was trying to control things. I was trying to, I didn't want to be addicted to drugs. I didn't want to admit that. I didn't want to be the guy in recovery. I didn't want to admit that. I didn't want all of these things, and I tried to control them. But at the end of the day, you can't. You have to accept that most of that stuff out there is going to happen with or without you. And you just have to control your reaction to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my biggest takeaways from it. And it's something I have to tell myself on a more than a daily basis, but especially in these times, right? Like at a time when we are out of control in a lot of different things, knowing where to put your energy into it and where not to is huge. I'm interested in you. Obviously, you're very good at communicating, talking to people, and I'm sure you're exact same way when you're in your addiction. So you can have these two different sides. You can have this one that's selling. You said pharmaceuticals, selling high-end cars, and then you said shooting up heroin before even a meeting, which to a lot of people sounds like they certainly wouldn't be able to balance the two. Do you, and this may sound crazy, and I'm only taking this because for myself, like I could always just get by drinking, nothing insane, but can still kind of like hold a conversation, and I almost found it a detriment because it almost felt like you could balance it for too long. I don't know if that makes any sense, but some people they were all in and they couldn't even function. And then there was other people that can at least appear like they got their shit together, but they don't. Did you ever, does that even resonate with you? Did you ever, does that sound like something, or did you ever wonder how can I possibly make these two things work for as long as I did?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it maybe is because, I don't know. I think there's a lot of, we can get into the whole kind of political side of it. And I've talked about not really necessarily political, but like the socioeconomic side and our perception of things, because, for me, and I think this even goes to now that when I write my column and I speak, the reasons why people are more intrigued or listen to me versus other people is because I don't really look the part. I don't look like the guy that was shooting heroin. I mean, people don't believe me when I literally tell you I've used needles off the ground. I've used, snow as melted snow as water to shoot up before. People, when you look at my face and you look at how I communicate and my life, it doesn't make sense, right? So it's kind of this strange juxtaposition. And what I did for 10 years, do all of those things and then still mostly show up and hide it at work. I mean, there's, obviously there was times where maybe I kind of went off the edge a little bit. But it's funny because even the people closest to you, I think people always try to give you the benefit of the doubt. And so you kind of have this more leeway where things that maybe should have been obvious and they are obvious in retrospect, you can skate by just because I think a large part of it is what I've noticed is me as the person using drugs in the workplace and going to meetings and different things like that, you think to yourself, somebody's going to notice, somebody's looking at me, somebody's thinking about me. But the truth is people are doing the same things about themselves. People think about themselves far more than they do you. People don't think about you as much as you think they do. We're all in our own head for different reasons. So it makes it a lot easier to skate by.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's just our ego. Everyone, you're right. They think the spotlight's on them all the time. And I think it's your story is actually, you mentioned it connects to people. And I think especially in today's age, it is super important because, I mean, it's a cliche, but heroin is not what it used to be. There's a lot of people, it doesn't matter what your income is, that are getting hooked on it. And a lot of that, goes back to the pharmaceutical companies and the pills that are pushed. And I think there are a lot of people now that are dealing with all kinds of addictions. And like I said, it doesn't matter how much money you make. So, and I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing that you're able to get in front of a lot more people because of people can't imagine you do it in the first place. I mean, I don't know. Do you think, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've just been blessed with the ability to communicate well. So I'm a good speaker. I can get on stage and I can speak and I enjoy doing it.
Right.
And I can naturally write well. Like I said, the first thing that I wrote was published in a newspaper, and I've written dozens of articles since then that have been published in places and featured in like the Boston Globe, Daily Stoic, different things like that. So I just naturally have always, thankfully, liked words, and I liked reading, and I liked writing. So it gives me a good vehicle to be able to share my story, where if I was really bad at writing and speaking, I wouldn't be able to so effectively talk about it and communicate it.
Yeah.
And it also, just being a good looking white guy makes it easier for people to just, it's more attractive. Not that that's right. That's just how it is. And the reason I bring that up is because, going back to what we just mentioned, there was a half dozen times where I literally crashed my car, or would get, go off the road, and I'm wearing a suit and driving a nice car, and I never once got an OUI, even though I was completely annihilated on drugs,
Right.
And I feel like if I was driving a $500 car and maybe was a person of color, or just wasn't well put together, probably wouldn't be the case. I probably wouldn't have been able to avoid jail time for as long as I did. So it's just, it's worked out in my favor.
Yeah. So you mentioned you do a lot of speaking, and I'll cut this off here in a few minutes, but you said you're doing stuff for actual hospitals also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've done a few different things I did a PSA campaign for the state of Maine, where they ran commercials. It was interview style. So it was me speaking on a commercial that ran for a couple of years. Just recently, I think they stopped running it again, but has millions of views. That was really successful. Basically, talking about a phone number 211 in Maine that you can dial or text and get real-time information on where to get treatment. So that was great. We ran those commercials all over TV, YouTube, everywhere. And then I've done some speaking and consulting for like Maine Health, for example, which is a group there's about a dozen hospitals in Maine and New Hampshire, speaking to their leadership team, just trying to kind of work with them on, maybe some of their messaging to their staff. Because one of the articles that how this actually came about is I wrote an article about my experience. Late one night, I walked into a hospital that they own, and it was the only pharmacy open. This was like 11, 12 at night. They have a 24-hour pharmacy. And I went and I tried to buy clean syringes because I was going to use drugs. I was going to use heroin. They refused to sell them to me. I felt, obviously, it was an awkward experience. Walking up to a pharmacy counter as a young person that clearly probably doesn't have diabetes and asking for insulin syringes is always an awkward experience.
Right.
But they didn't sell them to me. They said no, they turned me away. And so I walked out of the hospital and I went to a place quite literally under a bridge where I knew I could find a discarded syringe, and I picked one up off the ground and I used it. And I wrote about this, and, part of my message in writing about this was, you're a hospital, right? I'm a sick person. I went in there, and quite literally all I want to do is just give myself a fighting chance to not contract HIV or, hepatitis or get some sort of blood disease, and then end back up in the hospital and cost you guys more money and care because I have some blood disease now. And you turn me away. And the leadership at the hospital read that. And I think they were shocked and kind of understood, a little bit of where I was coming from. And that's turned into a meeting, and we've had a great relationship since then. So it's been quite the experience.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Hey, how do those two worlds, do they bleed into each other? You're so vocal about your journey, your addiction, and then you've got this obviously successful in your private side. Do those two worlds bleed into each other very often, or are they really kind of a separate thing?
The only times it's really bled in is I've had people that I work with before come to me, and ask for help with certain things. Maybe we've helped them get into treatment or things like that, which I think is fantastic. What's great about me being so open about these things that most people aren't is that it makes other people feel comfortable talking to me about things that they wouldn't talk to other people about. And that's been valuable. Yeah. So, outside of that, it's not really talked about. I go into work every day. Everybody knows, because it's hard not to, right? And if you follow me on any social media or you Google me or do anything, it's hard not to know these certain things about me. We don't talk about it. We're there to do business, and and it's it's not any different than any other work scenario. Maybe we joke about it sometimes, or somebody might razz me for it, for something to do with drugs, or you know what I mean. It's like it's business as usual. There's no reason to talk about it unless it comes up.
I guess the only reason I even mention it is because on social media, like you said, you live in a nice high rise. It looks like you're outside. You're around a bunch of other young, successful people, and some people can balance those things better than others. Like I know for me, I don't balance very well. Just like you, I need structure. I need to be held accountable because I haven't always been great at that at myself. Is it weird to be in these environments where you're around other people that can balance things and just, and where you find yourself in those environments? And I'll just say for myself, like I know if it's drinking at so many drinks, I'm going to punch out because they're having them. I'm not. They're on another level than I am, and that's cool. I just know when I got to duck out, and that's not even for me being tempted. That's just as far as the interaction, we're in two different places.
Yeah. So I think what's helped me is being so open about it. So I know there used to be times when, and I've written about this experience where this was back even when I was still married, before that all completely fell apart and everything. I would go through short spurts of sobriety, right? Where I would have maybe a month or two that I would actually be sober, and maybe I was going to meetings or doing certain things. But then let's say I went to a business meeting and people were drinking. I would lie and say like, no, I've been, doing CrossFit. I'm on a diet. My trainer says I can't drink alcohol, type of thing. I would just make up whatever story. And it's like now, after, 4 years ago when I actually was honest with myself and everybody around me, I don't have those same insecurities, and I don't, with people around you, if you're open and honest and you're comfortable being yourself, they also respect your boundaries. People, I haven't really, I don't know. I think it gets easier with time. It gets easier with me. Like I said, getting to a place where it's like, I don't wake up every day and feel like I have to fight against using a substance. It's just, I've accepted the fact that there are people that can, do coke on the weekend and go to work Monday and be fine. I haven't had success with that myself, but, and that's okay. And I don't, so far so good. I think everybody respects that, and they, I don't know. It's been good. Yeah. I'm happy, man. Life's good. I can't complain.
Yeah. I think that acceptance is the thing. It's like, you've proven it. I've proven it for myself that I'm not very good living somebody else's life. Like they may be able to handle it, and I can't. And I find pride in the fact that, hey, I found something that I wanted to stop doing, so I did whatever I had to do to stop doing it. And so there's no reason to hide it. And like you said, people coming up to you, I've had people will razz, but when nobody else is around, some of the same people that are like, pulling me aside, asking exactly how I did it, because they're interested in the same process. So, you mentioned something about possibly writing a book. Is that something like what phase is that? Is that just something in your head now, or is there pen on paper or?
Yeah, so I have been working. This has been something that I've actually been working on for a couple of years. With fortunate enough to have an editor helping me. And the way things work with a nonfiction book is that right now I'm working on a proposal, with I don't know how familiar you are with the book writing process, but for nonfiction, the publishing houses don't want to see a manuscript. They want a certain type of proposal with some writing samples and basically a business plan / outline for your book. So I'm working on that part now. It's something that I've been working on for a long time and been putting off for a long time. So I'm putting that together now, and I trying to get that picked up by a publisher. And then from that point on, it would be, I would have to write the rest of the book, and that will take probably another year. And so maybe in a year or two, we'll have a book, but it's going to be a process. It's going to be at least a year.
Cool. All right. We're going to end it here. But if you had some advice for the younger Seth Blais version of yourself, what would it be?
I think I would keep it simple, and I would just say, go to therapy every week and don't stop.
All right, cool. And one last one is, You got any habits you're thinking about picking up? Something you're contemplating and throwing around? Anything on the radar?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been working on is like the working out every day and the diet. So I'm really trying to dial that in. Any other habits that I can think of that I really want to pick up? I don't know, maybe I need to start some sort of physical habit again, like hiking. I used to hike a lot, hiking, biking. I need to do something physical. And I'm not sure what that is yet, aside from just hitting the gym.
Gotcha. All right. So I just want to make sure we get this stuff out there. If somebody wants to start reading your articles, that's going to be on the Portland Press Herald, correct?
Yeah, you can find me on the Portland Press Herald. If you just Google my name, Seth Blais, which is Blais. You can find it. I'm also on Medium. You can find me there, Facebook. So pretty easy to find. I think just Google my name and you can find some articles.
Cool. Seth, I appreciate you coming on, man. This is, like we said, this has been a little time coming, and I'm glad we were able actually to make it work.
Yeah, same here. And then, in a couple years from now, when you're bigger than Joe Rogan on Spotify, we'll connect again, and maybe by that time we'll have a book to push.
Yeah, I'll be putting my studio set up in Austin at that point. But
sounds good, man.
I appreciate it. You have a go now.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, this is JT signing out. That's it for me. I want to say thank you for listening to the Consequence of Habit podcast. Thank you very much to Seth Blais. He was like I said in the beginning, he was very gracious with his time. I really appreciate it. Hey, if you guys got anything from this, please like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about it. It's stories like this I really think can help others. There's a lot of people that aren't in the same position as him or not that far along in their recovery, or maybe they're not even in recovery yet, and they need to hear these stories. They need to know that there's something on the other side of this. So with that said, I will catch you guys all next week.